instead of farming enough currency to buy your desired item in Path of Exile, it is also possible to create the item yourself. Crafting is one of the most convoluted mechanics in Path of Exile. Hey everyone, my name is Scruffy. We are currently overhauling and updating all of our guides for Path of Exile, and we are happy to present you today the last guides for Path of Exile that you will ever need. Starting today with Chapter 3 of our Path of Exile Masterclass, we are taking a look into crafting. For all people that don't know me, I am a guide writer for Path of Exile and World of Warcraft on your MMO, and you can find all my guides here on my YouTube channel. I have done my fair share of terrible build guides in the past, and thanks to your feedback, I continued growing and making our guides even more pleasant. Our old crafting guide is not yet outdated, but I wanted to include several more things and especially a lot of crafting recipes. Today, we are starting with the basics of crafting. We will learn how crafting works, what are the basic methods of crafting, and how do base items even behave in Path of Exile. Afterwards, we will have a deep dive into advanced crafting and learning how to reverse engineer items that you see on other players and how you would craft them yourself. And last, we have several crafting recipes. For all people that already know everything about crafting, but just want to find out how a certain item is created, you can check the chapters of this video to find the item that you desire. As per usual, I really have to remind you that every like and every subscriber gives positive resonance to YouTube and pushes our video in the algorithm. If you end up liking this guide and you want to explore more in the future, please consider subscribing and giving this video a like. And without further ado, let's hop into crafting. In comparison to other games like World of Warcraft, where you go to a blacksmith and receive the item of your choice, crafting in Path of Exile is quite complex. Crafting only provokes a certain outcome on the item, which is determined by the equipment, which is modified. Crafting in Path of Exile does not mean you instantly create the perfect item. Instead, you are re-rolling the stats on an item in a certain order to provoke your desired stats to appear. In order to learn how to craft powerful and specially designed equipment in Path of Exile, you first have to know how stats on equipment works. Equipment and items like jewels can have different rarity level, determining the amount of modifiers on the item. Normal items have the rarity color white and can yield 0 stats on the item. Magic items have the rarity color blue and yield 2 stats. Rare items are yellow and can yield up to 6 stats. Unique items with the color orange can have up to 6 stats on an item, but they cannot be modified with regular means of crafting. Uniques or legendaries are just how they are. The stats on an item are mostly randomly generated upon creation. It is important to learn the terminology of stats on an item. Implicit stats are determined by the base item. Different items can have different implicit modifiers. The implicit will remain the same whenever an item is reforged through all other crafting steps. The implicit can later be modified through corruption, synthesis or eldritch influence, but this is something for later. Equipment varies in its base. There are many hundreds of different items, with dozens of different helmets or body armors and more. Base items will differ in its implicit modifier, granting different powers. Base items like body armor can also vary in its requirements, which also therefore causes different explicit modifiers later on to be available. The implicit is stuck to its base. This body armor has the implicit of evasion rating and energy shield. Another body armor here has the implicit of armor and energy shield. And this one only has armor as implicit. Energy shield is more tied to the intelligence stat, and when the body armor has energy shield as base, it will require a certain amount of intelligence before you can equip it. Armor is tied to the strength attribute, and evasion is tied to dexterity. This is why sometimes your build is lacking a few attributes to equip a certain gem or armor. There are other items that have a more clear implicit. Rings, for example, vary in its base and therefore vary in the implicit that they provide. There are rings with maximum life as implicit. There are rings with resistances, and there are also rings with other stats, like elemental damage. By the most regular means, the implicit remains the same no matter what basic crafting method you use to reroll the other stats. Talking about the other stats, this is what we are mostly worried about when talking about crafting. Whenever we reroll the stats on an item, it is often randomly generated. While the implicit always remains the same, these 6 other stats are rerolled, and we want to maximize the chance of receiving a certain stat that we want. But crafting wouldn't be so complex if we stop here. These stats are differentiated in 2 groups, prefix and suffix. Each item can have 6 stats, and 3 of them are always a prefix and 3 are always a suffix. So you wonder why there is a difference. Maximum life is always a prefix, no matter what happens. That means if you want to create your own item and you want maximum life on it, it already takes 1 prefix slot away. Suffixes work the same. Resistances like lightning resistance or fire resistance, which you always want to have maxed out at 75% or more, are suffixes. Your item can have only 3 suffixes, so you cannot get an item with all 4 resistances: fire, lightning, cold and chaos. You have to decide which ones you prefer. This is why we are limited to 3 pre and 3 suffixes. we cannot create an item that has 4 resistance types on it. Also, the item level of an item is very important. Each stat can have different tiers, and only after reaching a certain item level of the item, it can proc the highest tier. For most items, this is item level 84, but for some other items, like movement speed, it needs to be item level 86. To recap, we learned that there are different base items, and when you craft, you want it to be a good one. Like rings offering you a certain resistance that you need, or a body armor that provides armor or evasion, depending if you even use them as a defensive. Builds that don't use armor to mitigate damage will not need that little bit of armor on your chest, therefore you choose another base. We learned that these implicits are always staying the same, and the 6 possible stats on an item are 3 prefixes and 3 suffixes. You don't need to know or remember all hundreds of different stats, and if they are either a pre or suffix. Coming to our helper tools, PoE Database, or PoEDB, is a website that shows all stats that can be on a certain item. If you choose a helmet with Dex strength base, so the implicit later will be armor and evasion, then you can check what prefixes and suffixes are possible to achieve by various means of crafting. This will always be your handbook for the stats, and the website is linked in the video description. You might not like the fact that crafting is so convoluted and you need an external website for it, but I compare this to cooking. You have a full cabinet of spices, and throwing everything into your soup might not taste great at the end. We use recipes and a few chosen stats or spices that benefit our soup the most. And surely, cooking the same soup for a few times make you remember these steps. And if you ever want to try crafting for yourself, but you cannot afford it in-game without enough currency, you can check out Craft of Exile. This website simulates exactly how crafting is performed in Path of Exile. I will use this today later for the crafting recipes, and also shows the possible stats on an item like the PoEDB would do. Okay, we now know how to determine different base items, and we know where to find all possible stats. Tell us, Scrappy, what are the first crafting steps for players? Throughout the campaign, you will already have encountered certain currency orbs. The most common ones probably are transmutation orbs, alteration orbs, or chaos orbs, and so on. There are dozens of them. They are called currency because you use them to trade with other players as well. They always state exactly what they do, and I will show you a few examples. If your item is grey and therefore has no stats, we can turn it into a blue item with the transmutation orb. This orb's only job is to make a grey item to blue, granting it 2 randomly generated stats. An alchemy orb does the same, but it turns it from grey to yellow, a rare item with 6 stats that are completely randomized. With an alteration orb, I can now reroll the 2 stats on my blue item into 2 other randomly generated ones. And chaos orb does the same thing for a yellow item. Augmentation orb adds a stat to a blue item if there is space on it. And an exalted orb does the same thing on a rare yellow item if it not yet has 6 stats on it. I'll show you the first craft that all players should do regularly with their gear, flask and gems. If you found an item during the campaign that has many sockets linked together, you would probably love to use it. But it's grey, so let's turn it into something cool. First, the quality. Most items can have their quality increased, which further increases the value of the implicits. Quality increases that amount by a lot, so you don't want to miss out. Armorer's Scrap is the currency orb that increases the quality of armor, like a helmet or glove, up to 20%. There are other orbs for flasks, gems, jewelry and weapons of course, but they do the same thing. As soon as your item has its quality increased, we turn it either blue or yellow, preferably yellow with an alchemy orb, so it has the most possible stats. If we don't like the colors of the sockets, we can use a chromatic orb to change the colors randomly. Repeat this until you have your desired colors. Jeweler orbs can increase or decrease the amount of sockets randomly, and Orb of Fusing links a random amount of sockets together, so use this with care. It takes you an average of 1500 Orbs of Fusing to link all 6 possible sockets on a body armor together. If you didn't like the stats on the item when it turned yellow, you can either make it grey again with a Scouring Orb and try again to turn it yellow with Alchemy Orbs, or just reroll the stats with a Chaos Orb. Effectively, Scour Orb to turn it grey and Alchemy Orb to make it yellow again has the same effect as just rerolling the item with a Chaos Orb. There are more currencies that you will find on your way. Essences can be found on imprisoned monsters. They have the same effect as an Alchemy Orb or a Chaos Orb, turning an item from grey to yellow, rerolling all stats on it. But here, the text in the essence tells us that one certain stat will be guaranteed on the item. If we have an essence that would give our body armor the maximum life stat, then we can use that and have guaranteed life on it while the other 5 stats are randomly generated. This is already the first method to have one stat guaranteed of the 6 we later want. Fossil crafting is a bit more complex, but in the last crafting guide we did not really talk about it enough, so let's hop in there. Fossils can be placed into a resonator. This is a whole leak mechanic, the delve, that we not cover here but in another video. Up to 4 fossils can be placed into a resonator, which then acts like a chaos orb. It rerolls all stats on an item. Stats, as you can see on the PoE database, have tags on them. Maximum life has the life tag, fire resistance has the fire tag, and adding cold damage to attacks has the cold and the attack tag. A fossil combination placed into a resonator can reroll an item with a very high likelihood to achieve one of these stats available with the tag. If you used a jacked fossil, you will receive more physical stats on your item, but no chaos modifiers, already eliminating certain stats that could have a chance to appear, but are unwanted. Combined with a corroded fossil, we will also reroll the item without elemental modifiers and have more physical ailment or chaos ailment modifiers. But because the jacked fossil blocks chaos, we just increase the chance for all physical stats to appear, while still blocking all chaos stats and now all elemental stats. This is fairly complicated, and there is no player that can find out the perfect combination of fossils for a certain outcome. Instead, we are using Craft of Exile again, telling it what stats we want, and it then calculates itself what fossil combination would make the most sense, eliminating and increasing chances for certain stats in a certain combination to appear. Last, something lighthearted. The last basic way of modifying an item is the crafting bench in your hideout. Throughout the game, you will find a few recipes that can be just added to an item. As long as your item has an open prefix or open suffix, you can just go there and add a stat. This is often used as the last step of crafting. After provoking 5 specific stats on an item, we just craft the last one onto it. These stats are weaker than its original version that has to be randomly generated on the item, but it's better than nothing, and in most cases way cheaper. Crafting can become quite pricey. Crafting recipes can be found throughout the campaign, in certain maps later on, or learned by finding veiled items dropped by the syndicate mechanic that is in the game. Pick these items up, bring them to June, and unveiling a certain stat will learn you how to craft a stat. The crafting bench also offers the most important recipes that are used all the time when crafting an item, so-called mastercrafts. The costs for these are quite high, but they are incredibly important. As example, we can craft that the item can no longer roll attack modifiers. When we then re-roll the item with another crafting mechanic, it respects this craft and does not roll an attack modifier next time. We will use prefixes cannot be changed and suffixes cannot be changed a lot today. A craft like prefixes cannot be changed is the opposite itself, it's a suffix. Let's imagine I have an item and started provoking the 3 prefixes that I want. Then I am going to craft prefixes cannot be changed and use a crafting method that rerolls the item while still respecting this craft and saving my prefixes from being rerolled. Because this mastercraft itself is a suffix, it will be overwritten and rerolled like the other suffixes, but not our prefixes. From here on, we're going to look into some more advanced crafting methods that exist and learn how to reverse engineer other crafted items and how they are created. Let's look first into the PoE database, because there, all possible stats on an item are listed in a beautiful order. Starting on the top with the base stats. These mods can always be present whenever you reroll an item. Coming up next, the shaper prefixes and suffixes. These are in the same category as the next few ones: Elder, Crusader, Redeemer, Hunter and Warlord. An item can have an influence by one of these bosses. Being influenced adds their respective mods to the overall pool of possible stats on an item. A body armor without influence can have the regular stats on it when rerolled, but a body armor influenced by the hunter can have the regular stats and the hunter stats as well. To influence an item, you can either use an influenced exalted orb, rewarded by these bosses sometimes as a rare drop. And like a regular exalted orb, it will add 1 stat to the item, but this time it's 1 mod of the influence stat pool and permanently adding the influence to it. These bosses also drop some random items upon defeating them that have this influence already when dropped. Items can have later on more than just 1 influence, but this will be showcased in crafting examples. I will not talk for 10 minutes about each single currency orb in the game and what it does. Just remember that there is a way to put 2 influences on an item. Up next in the PoE DB, we find delve stats. These stats can only be achieved by using fossils on an item or being dropped in a delve, the leak mechanic where these fossils drop. Similar with Incursion, that leak mechanic has in itself no large impact into crafting, but when you ascend through the temple, sometimes the final boss can drop some random yellow items with one of these stats on it. Veil stats are also already known from our basics. They are obtained through the Syndicate leak mechanic and reward that crafting recipe for your crafting bench whenever you unveil it. Obviously, unveiled versions on an item directly are stronger than the ones crafted on your bench. Then PoE DB lists all stats that you can add over the crafting bench. And you find even the unveiled ones from before, just in weaker form. Essences show you all possible stats that can be obtained through essences themselves. Bestiary are only a few, and these are usually added onto an item with a bestiary craft, but we don't cover that leak mechanic today. The bestiary is only used a few times and will also be covered how in the examples. After now having a long list of possible stats on an item, we now have to learn how to achieve these stats on our gear. First off, you already learned about mastercrafts, like prefixes cannot be changed. We will use this a lot, and every time we craft an item, we either start with all suffixes or all prefixes to make use of this. Crafting will have some restrictions. An item that has a mastercraft, like prefixes cannot be changed on it, can no longer be rerolled with essences or fossils. This restriction will already limit the way we craft an item. This means in most cases that a stat on an item that is achieved with an essence will always start with an essence. Our goal is to achieve 6 stats on an item that are desired. One easy method is using a base item with a fractured mod. An item that is dropped with a fractured stat will also have some limitations. These items can, for example, no longer be influenced, so it's only beneficial to use if you don't plan to have one of these stats on it. Fractured mods will always persist on the item no matter what you do. If you want boots later on with chaos resistance, maybe you can check the market for a good base item with the chaos resistance as fractured mod. Beware that these items can become quite pricey because they are very high in demand. Imagine you have a base item with one stat already fractured, and then you use an essence on them, and suddenly you already have 2 of the perfect stats on it. Then you can craft one more stat on the crafting bench, and you already have an item with 3 out of 6 perfect stats. The harvest crafting bench is next, and should be something to consider. The harvest crafting bench does not work like your regular crafting bench. Instead, it has some unique recipes that don't have to be learned before. It also uses a new currency, we call it the harvest juice. When you encounter this mechanic in your map, you can enter into your garden and harvest some monsters. They either reward blue, yellow or red juice. Different recipes ask for different color of juice. Some examples are that the harvest bench can change fire resistance on your item to either cold or lightning. You can reroll the influence of an item into a random other influence, or you can reforge an item completely with a specific category of stats, similar to fossils. In comparison to fossils though, you can use the harvest bench with mastercrafts on it, and it will respect crafts like prefixes cannot be changed. The harvest bench will be used almost all the time because of that reason. Eldritch mods are implicits, added to an item with the Eldritch Ichor or Eldritch Ember. These are rewarded from the Eater of World boss or the Searing Exarch boss, but also sometimes the mobs that spawn in tier 14 maps can drop these too. These items just add an implicit to an item that usually don't have one. This only works with armor like helmet and gloves, but not with jewelry. They also have different ranks and can sometimes help with crafting as well, instead of just looking to achieve the best implicit. An Eldritch Chaos Orb does the same thing as a regular Chaos Orb, rerolling the item, but depending on if the blue or red implicit has the higher rank, it only rerolls either prefix or suffix. A regular Exalted Orb adds one random stat to an item. The Eldritch Exalted will only add a prefix or suffix if possible, depending on which Eldritch implicit is higher ranked on the item. But overall, Eldritch implicits are only meant to give you gear a little bit of extra power. Eldritch implicits cannot be applied to influenced items. With all these methods in mind, and again, you don't need to know every single bit of it, but it's very helpful to know that these exist and can be used. Let's take some items and inspect them to see how they are crafted. Let's look at these boots. I craft these boots almost every season. It's the most well-rounded boots that are fairly easy to achieve. The first thing you notice is the fractured mod and the crafted mod. This already gives us 2 out of 6 stats that we can guarantee. The chaos resistance is low on these because the base item with armor and evasion combined with the rare fracture is very pricey, but I settled for a few lower tiers on these stats, which is fine. I'll give you also one hint. The cold resistance on the boots is achieved with an essence. I just personally learned that there is an essence that will give you cold resistance. It just shows tier 2 because I did not use the highest rank essence to save money. You would often see the name essence on the mod because they are usually stronger than a tier 1 stat. So let's remember the restrictions of crafting and the possible methods. You want to always start with either prefixes or suffix. Because we have a fractured suffix, we will start with the suffixes. Also, we always want to start with an essence because we cannot reroll the item anymore with mastercrafts on it. I now take essence that gives my boot cold resistance, and I use as many as needed to achieve the third desired stat, spell suppression. Spell suppression does not have any tag, as you can see in the PoE database, and it is not a defense stat, which makes the only way to achieve this stat by being completely random. But if you do so, all your suffixes are complete. Spell suppression is a suffix and also the rarest stat to appear, and the other 2 suffixes are given by the essence and the fracture. With just one crafting step, the essence, we already achieved 3 out of 6 stats. From here we want to save our suffixes and start with the prefixes. They are probably really bad since the essence rerolled the whole item. With an annulment orb, we have a chance to remove one of the prefixes, but sadly it removes one random stat. The Eldritch annulment will help us just removing a prefix. The orb says that if the Searing Exarch, so the red one, is stronger, it removes a prefix. We add some random implicits on the item. with the red one being higher tier than the blue one. And then we use the Eldritch Annulment to safely remove a prefix and keeping our suffixes safe. Now we craft Suffixes Cannot Be Changed, which is a prefix, and are ready to potentially reroll our prefixes without losing the suffixes. Looking again at the final item, we see our life is just tier 3, and the 30% movement speed have the tag Chosen. This is an unveiled mod. We learned that these are from the Syndicate League mechanic, but unveiled instead of just crafted on it. Let's try to think about what possible methods we have now to reroll and provoke life. The movement speed comes from a Veiled Orb. This Veiled Orb will remove one random stat on your item and replaces it with an unveiled mod that could maybe be the one desired. Whenever we use a Veiled Orb, we want to make sure that a mastercraft like Suffixes Cannot Be Changed is on your item. It will respect that and either removes one other prefix or the crafted mastercraft itself and then become a veiled mod. So we cannot use fossils right now anymore to provoke life, but we learned that the Harvest Bench will respect my Suffixes Cannot Be Changed, so let's look in there. The Harvest Bench has almost every craft, which rerolls an item including one stat with the desired tag. We can reforge with at least one fire mod, we can reforge with at least one physical mod, and so on. So we now have to look into the PoE database. There's just no way you know this from the top of your head. Looking into the possible prefixes on our item from the regular pool, we see that there are only a few possible outcomes. The tags of them are included, so we see that there are only two stats with the life tag. It's either maximum life or maximum life and armor evasion as a hybrid stat. The red number on the side means the possible chance to achieve one of these stats. The higher, the more likely it will be to proc onto. Maximum life has a significant higher chance than the hybrid stat. So we have our item with 3 suffixes done and also locked, and we reroll it in the Harvest Bench and hope that we get a good life stat. There's always RNG involved. You can use the Eldritch Annulment to remove a prefix again, craft Suffixes Cannot Be Changed, and try again. Nothing is yet lost. If you end up being lucky, or just settle with the outcome, we use the final Veiled Orb after making sure our suffixes are saved by crafting Suffixes Cannot Be Changed again, and hope it does not remove the life, and our boots are almost done. Surely, there is, again, RNG involved, but it also can be easily repeated without destroying the whole item. Before unveiling, we can potentially block one stat. Veiled mods are the ones that you learn as crafting recipe, and they cannot appear twice on the same item. For our boots, we can craft Chance to avoid being chilled, because it has the highest chance to appear. When we craft this, unveiling will not use that stat, and hopefully you get the movement speed mod that you wanted, and we are done. Let's do one more reverse engineering example, a quick one, before we talk about corrupting an item. So this is a quick one. This right here was a question on Reddit, asked how to craft something like this. And with learning how all these methods work, we can easily identify that. The item has a fractured mod, only 5 stats overall and 2 crafted mods. First, you need a base item. Find a rune dagger like this, with +1 level to all cold skill gems, and we start crafting on it. We know that 2 more stats are crafted, and 2 other stats are on there. 74% increased spell damage is not even that high. Looking into the Path of Exile database, the regular one could proc up to 100% increased spell damage. Is there an essence for spell damage? Yes, there is. And the guy who crafted this weapon only used rank 2 essences because he wanted to save money. The other stat is crit chance. This, looking into the suffixes possible, is the highest tier. The way he crafted it is using a fractured base, using spell damage essences on it, until he achieved the crit chance. The chance for this is not even too low and fairly achievable. Afterwards, he would already be done because the other 2 stats are crafted, but obviously the item will have some unwanted stats on it. Now he has to clear it with annulment orbs, so only the desired stats are remaining. This step has to be repeated probably several times, but according to the numbers, we are not spending a ton of money on it. When the item is clean, he crafts can have up to 3 crafted modifiers Mastercraft and adds the last 2 crafted stats. That's how you obtain 2 crafted stats on an item. The picture does not show the 6th stat here, the can have up to 3 crafted modifiers, but this is how it will be achieved. Otherwise the item would have only 5 stats instead of 6. You could try to use an annulment orb at the end and hit the Mastercraft with a 20% chance and then use an exaltment orb for a useful 6 stat, but let's not over exaggerate. We're only going with what we see here. I don't want to talk about the next thing, but I have to. Corrupting an item is bad. I mean, it can be great if you're lucky, but you can also just destroy all effort that you put into the game with just one click. Corrupted items can no longer be modified with regular crafting methods. There are some orbs that can still change a few things on it, but it is very random. Whenever you crafted your perfect item, you can bring it into an incursion, the Temple of Arsolato. And with the correct room unlocked, you can double corrupt it even. Corrupting changes your item unpredictably. It sometimes does nothing when you use it, sometimes it changes the implicit of an item, the desired outcome, Sometimes it makes the item to something new, which is not revertible and just breaks your item, or it just destroys the item completely, making you having more backspace suddenly. Most of the time, newer players do not want to corrupt any items except for their flask. You might have noticed that if you try to increase the quality of your flask over 20%, then you have to use a Val Orb to corrupt it. This can sometimes lead to your flask having less quality than before, and then you can no longer modify it anymore and start crafting a new one. From here on, I will talk about some crafting recipes for the most desired items in the game. These recipes shall be used to come back whenever you want to craft these items, but are also great examples of what is possible. I will make sure to include many different crafting methods, even some ultra expensive crafts that are only done by the elite Path of Exile players. If you liked the guide until here, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, help the algorithm pushing this video higher up. Let's start with the short bow for the Toxic Rain build. The reason for a short bow is the high attack speed and the low requirement of dexterity. Toxic Rain builds do not worry about the DPS on the bow themselves. With an Orb of Transmutation, we turn the bow blue. Then, we're gonna use as many alteration orbs as needed to achieve tier 1 attack speed. From here, we're gonna turn the bow yellow with a Regal Orb, and then we have to clean the bow again. We want to use 2 Annulment Orbs and hope to have the attack speed remaining. If not, start with Alteration Orbs again. Now we're gonna craft can have up to 3 crafted modifiers and cannot roll attack modifiers. Our suffixes are now filled, and we're gonna use an Exalted Orb and provoke the +1 level to socketed gems. This is the only possible outcome with a 100% chance. Now we're gonna use a Hunter's Exalted Orb and achieve increased chaos damage over time. This is also a 100% chance to achieve, but it has different tiers, so you might want to settle with a lower tier instead of tier 1. Now we're gonna recraft the can have up to 3 crafted modifiers and gonna craft level 2 socketed support gems and chaos damage over time. And without a lot of effort and very deterministic crafting, you achieved your Toxic Rainbow. Coming up next, the Elemental Bow for the Lightning Arrow build. We're going with the cheap variant that players can even attempt in the earlier stages of the endgame, because the strongest Lightning Arrow bow is going to be very expensive. We're looking for a bow with all elemental damage on it. It doesn't matter which one of those are fractured, but this will make the next steps way easier. In our example, we took a cold damage fracture. Make sure the bow is yellow, and from here, we're going to use any essence that applies another elemental damage on it. We want to achieve the 3rd elemental damage. In our example, we used fire damage essences until we achieved a very high lightning damage proc. From here, we want to make sure that our prefixes are locked and clean the suffixes. The cheapest version now would be to craft can have up to 3 crafted modifiers, crit chance and attack speed. You can also lock the prefixes and use a Veiled Orb, craft 1 more stat and then use an Exalted Orb. To quickly explain the high budget version, from here you would be crafting accuracy rating and strength and dexterity hybrid, and you would use a lot of Exalted Orbs until you achieve bow attacks via additional arrows. Afterwards we would use the Harvest Craft to augment into crit or speed and craft the last stat then. The chance for your Exalted Orb to hit this is less than 1%. Looking next into a rather cheap Omniscience Ring where you stack some attributes. We're looking for a cool base with 1 attribute, either dexterity, intelligence or strength, as a fracture. We're using critical strike multiplier essences until we achieve another attribute in tier 1. With this, thanks to the fracture, we are already done with our suffixes. We're gonna be locking our suffixes and reforge into attack on the harvest bench. If your item fails, you have to clean it again. Now we're gonna use suffixes cannot be changed again and have a 50% chance to hit the Veiled Orb and it removing the Mastercraft. Make sure before you unveil that you craft mana on it and pray for the maximum life. From here we're gonna be crafting non-challenging skills have minus mana costs, and we're already done. For the infamous Righteous Fire Helmet, we're looking for an armor based helmet, preferably item level 82, because going with a higher item level gives us more possible stats to appear, and that needs to be Elder influenced. We are using Essence of Horrors. To achieve socketed gems deal 30% more elemental damage. Because we want to stick to either suffixes or prefixes, and the essence is a suffix, we want to achieve the first influenced mod, which is a suffix. With this essence, we want to achieve socketed gems are supported by burning damage. There is sadly no way to achieve a 3rd good suffix, so you decide yourself if you settle on something or not. In our example, our suffixes are full, but we settle. Now we are locking the suffixes and reforge influenced mods on the harvest bench. This is around about a 1 in 12 chance to give us concentrated effect. As a last step in our example, we go for a Veiled Orb and hope to not remove the Elder Influence prefix. Settle with whatever outcome you like, and if you can, finish off with any craft that you like. This craft is a good example how much RNG can be involved and how far you want to take it crafting the perfect one. You can surely elevate the helmet as well with some Maven Orbs, but this would suddenly make the difference between a few dozen Divine Orbs to a few hundreds. The infamous +2 amulet. You want a good base that is preferably clean and only has the one level to all skill gems on it. You could roll this yourself with alteration orbs, but the chance for this is incredibly low. I personally go ahead and buy a clean base, as you can see here, from the market every season. We are crafting can have up to 3 crafted modifiers and go to the bestiary and create an imprint. This allows us to always come back to this amulet right here if anything goes wrong. We're turning the amulet yellow with a regal orb and hope that our suffixes are clean. From here we're going to be crafting cannot roll attack modifiers and prefixes cannot be changed. Now we can augment in the harvest bench whatever element you prefer. If you want fire skill gems, you can use augment fire. If you like chaos, you can augment chaos. The chance to achieve the +1 level to all skill gems for the respective element is 100%. If you don't like the random prefix that you have, if you have one, you can clean it and you're already done. From here you can craft in any way you like. Crafting can have up to 3 crafted modifiers, but in our example we go a little bit further. After cleaning we're going to be crafting prefixes cannot be changed and gonna use a veiled orb. We're hoping to achieve a prefix. We can no longer block anything, so we just have to unveil and hope for something good. Now we're gonna be crafting prefixes cannot be changed again and use augment fire on the harvest crafting bench. This has a fairly good chance to give us the fire damage, but it could also be fire resistance. So you might want to repeat the step. Now we already have 4 cool stats for a righteous fire build, and now we're using a hunter's exalted orb. The chance to achieve fire damage over time is around about 15%, so I wish you the best of luck on that. Craft the last stat, like attributes, that you could use. Coming up next, a very expensive base, a Simplex amulet. And we want to use it on a magic find build that uses caustic arrow or toxic rain. First we need an influence, so we're going to use any exalted orb that gives us a random influence. On the harvest bench, we are going to reroll the influence type and hope to achieve the shaper. Now we're going to be rerolling the amulet, and we are using chaos orbs for it. We want to achieve the suffix that increases our quantity of items found. We have to clean the amulet, so we're using annulment orbs. From here we craft can have up to 3 crafted modifiers and suffixes cannot be changed, and reroll into chaos in the harvest bench. This has a 100% chance to give us the level to all chaos skill gems. Because it's a Simplex amulet, the stats are doubled, so it's +2 skill gems. And now we're gonna be crafting the last stat and we're done. The Aura Stacker Int Helmet. We're using fossil crafting this time. We want to use faceted and glyphic fossils together. Faceted gives us more gem stats, and glyphic gives us a stat that is achieved with an essence usually. What we want is level 2 socketed aura gems and level 2 socketed intelligence gems. We want to socket our auras into this helmet, including an enlightened gem, which is also affected by the socketed intelligence gems. Let's hope the item is kinda clean, and in our example, we have a free prefix and a free suffix. We crafting can have up to 3 crafted modifiers to fill our suffixes, and then we're locking our suffixes with suffixes cannot be changed. We use a reforge into defense stats, which can only achieve energy shield stats. Afterwards we're gonna lock the suffixes again, and now we're gonna augment into a defense stat. With this, we're gonna achieve another energy shield stat, hopefully the desired one. We're going for another round of suffixes cannot be changed, and have now a 33.3% chance that our veiled orb removes the suffixes cannot be changed. With unveiling, we hope for the level of socketed AoE gems. Craft your last stat, like fire and cold resistance in our example, and we are done. Looking next into Hexblast Gloves. The strongest players are using an abyssal socket because they're not having anything else as a replacement for the 4th regular socket. First, we need some good gloves that are dropped in the incursions. We're looking for gloves with the cold resistance and increased damage with hits against chilled enemy stat. Now crafting becomes really expensive because you want to use a fracturing orb. Make sure your item has only 4 stats available and you have a 25% chance that the fracturing orb will fracture the desired stat. This was the expensive part of the gloves. We're using a single fossil, the hollow fossil, to obtain the suffix abyssal socket. Just reroll this until you ideally have a free suffix and free prefix. For the last suffix, we want the aspect of the avian scale. For this, we go into the bestiary and use the right recipe, which just augments the stat as a suffix. And suddenly, your suffixes are done. Lock your suffixes and reroll in the harvest bench for defenses. Similar as before, we're gonna lock the suffixes again and now augment and have a 50% chance to hit the Mastercraft. For the last stat, we're just gonna be crafting increased damage during any flask effect. The most expensive craft for today is an insanely strong, triple elevated influence chest. We once again want to start with prefixes. We're looking for any chest with the Crusader influence. We're gonna reroll this chest with any means until we achieve enemies have a chance to explode when they killed. Important is that we also achieve a second influence stat on the item so we can elevate it with a Maven orb. the Maven Orb has now a 50% chance to elevate the explosion proc. If you achieve this, put this chest to the side and start with a second chest, the one that you later want to use. With our second chest, we're gonna do the same thing. We're looking for a chest that has 2 stats from the Hunter influence on it. One of them should be Regenerate Life. We also want to elevate that Regenerate Life and use the Maven Orb with a 50% chance to achieve this. With an Awakener Orb, we're gonna combine both chests together. You right click the Awakener's Orb, then click on the chest that you want to destroy, but fuse its influence stat onto the second chest you click on. This will reroll the new item completely, but guarantees at least both of these stats to appear. We want to make sure that our prefixes are clean. The dangerous part now is to use annulment orbs. In our example, as soon as possible, we're gonna be locking our prefixes, which are only the influence stats, and gonna use a Veiled Orb. We're hoping for a prefix. That prefix preferably is maximum life and maximum mana. The chances for all these things for now to appear are fairly low, which makes this craft so expensive. But we're not even done yet. Our prefixes are now done, but we still want some suffixes and one more elevated stat. We're going to the harvest bench after locking our prefixes and reroll as many times, always with prefixes locked, until we achieve the stat that we want. But we now need a second influence stat as well. In our example, we are crafting fire and cold resistance to block as many possible stats, and we're using now again Exalted Orbs with a fairly low chance to achieve any other influence stat. We're locking the prefixes and we rock that 50% chance to elevate the crit chance for attacks, or spells if you want. And because we haven't spent enough money yet, now we're crafting strength and dexterity, and we have a chance of around about 1% to achieve chance to suppress spell damage. If you didn't get it, lock prefixes and repeat. If you by accident remove the elevated suffix, have fun starting over again on the step where we started with the suffixes.